Everyone for coming here today, not just to listen to us, but to make us a visual statement. Because I've been coming to Hong Lim Park now for several years, and I have to say, I've never seen so many people here. We've had 200 or 300, 100, whatever. I think the park is full. So I think you should all give yourselves a big round of applause for turning up, for having the courage to say we're not going to accept the status quo anymore. So I have been asked to get the proceedings back on topic. I know we've had some great speakers. They've picked many subjects. They've gone ranging all over the place. But I did write a speech in advance for the abusive process. Although I have to say, I rewrote it this morning after I saw a post from DP Tharman. And because of that, I'm afraid I'm going to be using my phone a little bit, so sorry for looking like an amateur, but I don't have a teleprompter in front of me like other presidents do. So what DP Tharman said, he was at Davos. He was with all the elites. They were doing their thing that they do. But what he was remarking at is how he saw all the division that's happening in the world, all the democracies that were breaking down, and especially where the common man were rising up against their rulers, country by country by country. He also mentioned about, he said there was humility in the air, although personally I think that was more a case of some of the smarter ones realizing that they've pushed it too far, that their whole idea of driving people into their agenda so that they have everything and everyone works for them, that one step too far. It's no accident that, as I read recently, 8 people now have as much wealth as half of the population of the planet. Right? That's 8 people having as much money as 3.8 billion people. That doesn't happen naturally. That happens when processes and systems get hijacked by a small group and abused by a small group, and they enrich themselves at everyone else's expense. And sadly, we see exactly that same thing happening here in Singapore. Now, of course, what he talked about overseas was they're doing it in the polls, although if you look at France and some of the other countries, they're actually out doing it on the streets. But of course, in Singapore, we don't want anything like that, right? We want our changes to be democratic. We want them to be peaceful. We want to use the proper processes to change our country into something better. Now, one of the other things he talked about, and let me just find this page on my thing, was he described how dark and troubling the world is, and that to be relevant in it, we need to build our skills and capabilities to be relevant and trusted in the world. And you've heard a lot of people talking about abusive process and all sorts of subjects today, but one key element of all of that is free speech. Free speech is the basis for fueling innovation, for the relevance and the skills and the capabilities that DPN was talking about. So this is where I'm going to talk a little bit about me, so you know who I am, so you're wondering why there's an Angmo up here. Although a part of my youth was in Singapore, my early childhood was in the UK. Now, of course, the UK has a very Western and liberal attitude to free speech, but I'm not going to argue for free speech for its own sake. The part of the UK I came from was the East End of London. Now, we have a culture that's very similar to the culture here. We respect our elders. We're very conscious of race and religion, although in the East End, the religion is basically which soccer team you support or other sports team, but along those sorts of lines. And we respect our elders, you know. So a big part of that culture, though, I haven't seen here. And that part is to do with freedom of expression. We were encouraged to question, but we stayed within the bounds of social responsibility. And that's a theme I want to talk about today, is that we're not talking about free speech just to go out and blah anything. We understand that we work in a certain society, but we have to be able to go out and speak and question and ask. So outside of those social no-goes, as I said, we're encouraged to question, to debate, to come up with ideas, generally to be innovators rather than followers. And of course, we all know we have far too many followers in Singapore and not enough leaders. Now, for those of you who may not know, there are actually quite a lot of famous East Enders. I'm just going to say a few, some of you may know some of these names. Entrepreneurs, Alan Sugar, Richard Branson. Actors, common actors, Idris Elba, Colin Firth. Sports people, for you soccer fans, Bobby Moore, David Beckham, both captains of England at one time. Musicians, David Bowie, David Essex, Alfred Hitchcock, the film producer. And if you go online, and actually a little challenge for you all after this, go Google it, famous EastEnders, you'll find hundreds, if not thousands of them, in politics, science, art, literature, all areas. And this is what was the poorest and roughest part of not just London, but probably England as well. And very small, much smaller than Singapore. So how and why, from that background, is so much created? Because they were nurtured in a place that supports creativity and it supports freedom to express. When the people can use their wits and their abilities within those clearly defined social boundaries, they can achieve the success they need. A place where their brains and each other were pretty much the only resources they had, and where they supported each other and they didn't spend any time trying to knock down their neighbour and make sure their neighbour didn't come up to protect their own position, but helping each other. Because they understood when the real best got to the top, everyone had a better life. But when the wrong people got to the top, everyone suffered. This is a situation I'm sadly seeing here and something that we need to really address. So, bringing this all back to the relevance in Singapore. So I've been here for nearly 3.5 decades, 35 years. Came here as a very young man. Now, in the time here, I have met people just the same as the people I met in the East End. People who were creative, people who were artists, people who had ideas, people who had passion, people who were entrepreneurs. So we have all the raw talent here, and actually we have more, because the East End of London was, as I said, a very poor and downtrodden area. Singapore, you have lots of wealth, you have great education, globally connected. There are so many advantages, plus the raw talent. So why don't we go on Google and find hundreds or thousands of famous Singaporeans? Why aren't Singaporeans having an impact around the globe? What is happening to our people that raw talent doesn't come out? Well, and this is obviously my point of view, for those 3.5 decades, I haven't seen encouragement of the people. What I've watched is anyone who was different, anyone who dared to dream, and especially anyone who questioned those in charge, got a very metaphorical big clip around the ear to get them back in their place. I saw most signs of innovation being absorbed into the GLCs and various other places, and what were great ideas were taken over by bureaucrats, no idea how to be entrepreneurs, and they just get wasted and thrown away. Or if they can't take them over, suppressed in some way because they challenge the status quo. And that was all not because they were disrespectful or insensitive, or they crossed any social boundaries at all, but just because they showed a feeling of being something other than being that they wanted to create something and they wanted to be different. And that is not allowed, not unless you've got the stamp of approval inside the system. What kind of country is that? Exactly. And of course, to do what have they done? Well, I've seen rules and laws being changed to enable that discipline. Rules and laws, when they don't quite fit, as in the case that has prompted today's thing, they get twisted a little bit to extract the meaning so that they can get the result they want. So twist the law, change the law, manipulate the law. But we have to respect the law. The law is the basis of what our society is. So what happens if they then get the freedom to twist it and abuse it all the time? That starts to break down our society. And that could end up in a situation where they have in France, where they don't trust anymore and they're out on the streets in yellow vests. That should never happen here. So we have to wake up and start talking before it gets to that point where the abuses are so much that we have no other choices than to take such radical action. That's why I'm so glad to see so many of you here today, because a lot of you are realizing that we need to do something different, and we can't be yes men, and we can't be docile, and we can't just sit back any longer. A question for you is, if we don't use our minds and think and question and then create, what do we become? Won't the world just pass us by? If we become a docile labour force with no invention, what differentiates us from the rest of the world? Where are the skills and the capabilities that DP and Tharman says we need, and where is our relevancy? Essentially, what makes us valuable to the world or to anyone? We already see our own government replacing us. When they want a low-cost worker, the blue collar, they say, they go and get someone from overseas. And now, and I'm sure some of you here are suffering the same, it's not just the blue-collar workers even, it's now moving up into the skilled workers and the white-collared workers. So if our own government treats us like this and throws us away for a few dollars and some profits, how is a foreign company going to invest in us? Why is anyone going to come here? Because we can't be cheap. We're now the most expensive country in the world. The only thing we have, which we've been told for 35 years, or I've heard it for 35 years, is the people. Us, you and I. We're what we have. And if we're not developed, if we're suppressed, then we have no value for anyone. And we may end up having to steal other people's lunches because no one's going to give us a chance to earn one if we don't have the abilities that they want. So, sort of summarising some of this stuff up, Singapore, like the East End, and some of the most successful nations in the world, has some limitations in size, has some limitations in population and in resources. But those other places and countries overcame them by nurturing their people and supporting their people. Their governments were not afraid of change. Their governments were not afraid of being challenged because they knew that made things better for everyone. Their governments are not insecure and don't want to take credit or the profit for everything that happens on the island. Their governments, knowing that they had a small population, cast their net wide. They would look to everyone here and they would see who was the best. And they would put them through the system, they would bring them forward, and that would be how everything progressed. They wouldn't be going, I'm going to make a tiny little group, primarily consisting of my children, my relatives, and all my friends, and give everything to them and shoo them through a system and make them the leaders and whatever. They would know that they don't hold all of the ideas, they don't hold all the abilities, that everyone out here has those, and they would know to nurture and use those people. Unfortunately, that isn't happening here in our country. So freedom of speech is an existential element for Singapore, because without it, and without the creativity that comes from it, what is our future? Freedom of speech within boundaries, of course, but clearly defined boundaries that don't move, are not arbitrarily applied, and are not used to stop innovation, stop change, and stop the growth of the people and the nation just so that a small group can benefit. Once we freely communicate, share ideas and question, then we can innovate, we can create, we can have value for ourselves and to the world. And we can make Singapore a country that will have hundreds or thousands of people that in the future will be Googled online. Or look at that famous actor, that famous politician, that famous businessman. This guy who's invented something that's helping everyone. We can have all that. We have the raw talent. We just need to nurture it and use it. So I hope that you'll all go away from today and think about how important this is for us all. And when you've got the opportunity, whether it is in your work, at home, or at the ballot box, you start taking actions and doing things that will make some real change, that will make us a united people, that will support us, and it will make our country a home again. Thank you very much.